Hey, what's up YouTube? So last week we showed you guys this deck box. Today we're going to be doing a tutorial for a leather deck box, but we made some changes. On this one we found that these snap closures were actually really hard to manipulate. So what we ended up going with was a latch style like this one right here. Super easy, a lot cleaner to use, and I think it just looks a lot better too. So this will be the one that I'll be showing you guys how to make today. So let's jump into it. So one of the most important things when working with leather is to take your time. Making patterns is a big part of that. Leather's expensive. Stuff like this is super cheap. So the first pattern for the original deck box, this is actually made out of a yoga mat that we got from Fry's Electronics. They sell a lot of weird stuff there, but it's super useful, cheap, and it's got some thickness to it, so it can kind of simulate the thickness of the leather that you'll be working with. So super useful. Once we refined that, I actually got a piece of cardstock and made kind of something a little more precise as a pattern. So this is the one that we're going to be using today to recreate this box here. So what we're going to be doing now is tracing it out and cutting our leather. So we've got our piece of leather out. Again, leather's not super cheap, so we want to make sure that we use it as efficiently as we can. So I'm actually going to lay the pattern down kind of in this section because the pattern extends out to here using as much of the leather as we can. So the other thing to remember is you've got this rough side right here, and then on the other side, it's nice and smooth. This is what you'll actually see on the outside of the box. This is what we're going to be dyeing. This is the part that's really going to show. So we want to trace our pattern on the rough side, that way the pin marks that we're going to make are going to be hidden once the deck is fully constructed. So we've got our pattern rough cut. For cutting leather, you want to make sure you have a good pair of scissors. Normal household scissors, fabric scissors really aren't going to do the job, so make sure you invest in a decent pair of leather scissors. From here, we're going to do the more exact cut, getting the pattern trimmed down to exactly what we're going to be working with. Make sure you're ready for this. Your hand does get kind of tired, but it's worth it in the end. So we're a little closer to our final pattern. There's still some detail in here that we need to get out, and the big pair of scissors that we have just won't do the job. So what we're going to use instead is an X-Acto knife. Here we've got a set that I picked up from Harbor Freight. So a good place for some things, others, you know. The other thing you're going to want is a rubber mat to cut on so you're not cutting into whatever working surface you're using. You can get these at most leather supply stores. So now we're going to use an X-Acto knife to kind of carve out that finer detail. Now that we've got the pattern fully cut out, nice and clean, the next thing I went ahead and did is I marked some lines where we're going to be folding the leather. I got those lines based off the pattern we made. Again, super important to make sure you have a pattern. To cut these lines, we're going to be using a tool called an adjustable V-gouge. Again, something you can get at a leather supply store. We used Handy. It's pretty awesome. They have everything you need. And what we're going to be doing is taking this and basically making a small gouge into the leather across these lines. It's going to allow us to fold the leather nice and clean so it doesn't get bunched up on itself. This next part's actually really fun. This is where we're going to start actually molding this nice flat piece of leather into something that's a little more three-dimensional. To do this, you're going to need some water. You can either run it under the sink, or like I've got right here is a nice big pot just with some tap water. The leather can't be super soaked, so you want to make sure you've got some paper towels ready to go to absorb some of that extra water. The other thing that makes this a lot easier is a nice block of hardwood with really nice right angles on it. We're going to use this pretty heavily in the molding process. Alright, so I've got some paper towels ready to go for soaking up some of the extra moisture out of the piece of leather that we're going to be wet molding. So all you want to do is just dip it right into the water. It doesn't have to stay down for very long. You'll notice a color change. Once it gets kind of dark and consistent, you're good to go. So this is kind of what you're looking for right here. From here, just throw it on paper towels and just kind of press some of that extra moisture out. Whenever you wet the leather, it's going to pull some of the oils out. It's going to be a little stiffer, which is what we want from a deck box. But for other projects, you may want to keep that. So just make sure you get all that extra moisture out of there. So you'll notice now it's a lot more supple, easier to work with, bends real easy at those groove marks that we made. So this is where we're going to take our block of hardwood. We're basically just going to line it up with those grooves that we made. And we're going to bend the leather up. You want to make sure that you crease it at the bottom nice and tight. This is going to allow it to have really good shape when it all starts coming together. And you're going to do this process all the way around on every single one of those groove marks that you made. So now that we've bent all of our grooves, what we're going to do is actually start to assemble this to kind of see it come together. This is going to take a little bit of work. Now that we've got those really nice folds in it, and fold it all the way over, kind of like if you were working a piece of paper. This will really set in those edges. So once it all comes together, it'll have that really nice, clean look to it. Depending on the pattern that you made, this is going to fold together a little bit differently. If you used one kind of like what we have here, you're going to fold your middle up first, and then the bottom's going to kind of come together. And then this front flap is actually going to fold inside the two round front flaps. Starting to look like a deck box finally. And this is where you're going to kind of fine tune everything. Make sure everything's lining up nicely. Starting to get a little closer. So at this point, your leather is still kind of wet, so if you need to make any adjustments, either cutting, folding, anything like that, this is a pretty decent time to do this. This is going to take a little while to dry. You want to make sure it's good and dried out, and try to keep it in this position during the drying process. That's going to help these edges stay really sharp. So our box is dry for the most part. I actually let this sit out overnight. I wanted to make sure that the leather was fully dry. That way, when working with it, I'm not getting any kind of wrinkles or any molding that I don't actually want on here. So again, it's a matter of patience. Make sure it's fully dry. Don't try to speed the process up by putting it in the oven, because you'll actually get some shrinkage on the leather. The folds may not work quite right. If you're in a warm place, you can set it outside. That's totally fine, but not in the oven. So now that we've got it ready to go, what we're going to do is use our rivet caps, these tiny little guys here, and we're going to start kind of placing our rivets where we want them to go. So this is entirely up to you what kind of style and look that you're looking for. What I like to do is just kind of place them on the box, roughly where they're going to go. Once I'm happy with the placement, I'll just kind of press them on there. The bottom of the rivet has a little sharp cup, and it'll actually score the leather. That way I can use my hole punch to punch out the holes exactly where they need to go. Went ahead and placed all my rivets where I want them to go, pressed them in, got some nice little scoring marks so I know where to punch the holes. The other thing that I did was I took the latch that I'm going to use and got that nice and lined up exactly where I wanted it to go, and just used a ballpoint pen to mark through the holes. Again, now this thing's ready to punch. So what we're going to do now is use our leather punch to punch out our rivet holes. If you have a punch that has multiple sizes on it, you want to go ahead and shift it to the smallest one possible. That way the rivet shank that you'll be placing through the leather will be nice and firm, it'll have a really good grip, and your box will be nice and solid. So we're going to go ahead and punch those holes out. So now that we have our first set of holes punched, what you'll need to do at this point is kind of refold the box back to what it'll look like when it's complete. Once you've done that, you want to use the holes that you've already punched to mark the back set of leather. You've got a couple areas that you'll be attaching it to, so you want to make sure that you mark those holes nice and accurate. That way when you fold the leather together and put the shanks through there, they line up nice and even and keep that shape on the box. So I went ahead and did that, marked it out. A few more holes to punch, and then we can move on to the next step. At this point, all your holes should be punched out, and so we're going to move on to molding the edges. So to do this, you're going to need a little bit of water, sponge. This is just a cheap paint sponge we picked up from Home Depot. Really nice because you can just cut off sections in the size that you need. You'll need a couple tools for molding. The plastic wheel that we have here is really good for getting rounded edges, and then for the tighter areas, we've got a couple super fancy molding tools, but if you don't have anything like this, just a tiny little spoon works as well. Again, we just want to get a nice round edge all the way around the edge that we cut out. Now that the edges are rounded and dried, we're going to move on to staining. To do that, you're going to need a couple things. Something to lay down and protect the surface that you're working on. Whatever color stain you want. In this case, we're using a water stain, dark brown. The stain applicator And keep in mind, when staining leather, depending on what you're using to apply the stain, the color is going to change. These little fuzzy cotton balls tend to put a lot of stain on. Looks really good, really nice and vibrant. Whereas if you use a piece of sponge, it actually ends up turning the stain more of like a drab color. So if you're going for something a little more worn or distressed, you may want to go with a sponge. And then some latex gloves are a good thing. Again, the stain's made to stain leather, so it's really good at staining your hands as well. At this point, the leather's stained. It is a little wet, obviously, since you were using a water stain. So what I like to do while it dries is to kind of fold it back into the box shape that it's going to be in the final product. That way, as it's drying, the folds that we made will stay nice and crisp. It'll keep its shape. Now to help it do this, what I like to do is take the large rivet shafts. These are not the same shanks that you're going to use in the final assembly. But what I like to do with them is just pop them through the holes that we made, and they work really well at keeping the leather together. That way, as the dye is drying, again, you're going to be able to keep a nice consistent shape, keep those nice angles that you folded in there. So I'm pretty happy with the way the stain turned out. I ended up putting an extra coat on here just to make it a little darker. The next thing that I like to do is use a product called Leather New. What it does is polish and conditions the leather. It's really going to make the color and the texture pop out and be a lot more vibrant. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to. I just like the way it turns out in the end. The saddle soap doesn't take a whole lot of time to dry. Again, you want to make sure that it's just ready to manipulate. From here, we're going to move on to the final step, and that's the exciting part. actually putting this together and getting to see our deck box really come to life. So I've got laid out the hardware that we're going to be using. We've got our latch, 2 longer shanked rivet bottoms. The reason being is the middle part of the latch is actually going to be on top of 2 pieces of leather. So you want to make sure that your shank will fit all the way through. The other shanks we're using are just the small ones. They're only going through 2 pieces of leather instead of 2 pieces of leather and a piece of metal. Rivet heads, I'm going to be using a mallet, the rivet setter, and then we've got a couple extra pieces here. The wood block that we used for molding, we're actually going to be using this to slide inside and pound these rivets down. And then an extra piece of rubber mat that we've cut down to size. This is going to help take up some of the extra space that's inside the box. And there you have it. After a little bit of hammering, our deck box is complete. Turned out really, really nice. I'm really happy with the color. If this is a little too much work for you guys and you just want to pick one of these up, check out the link below to our website and you can order them there. If you guys haven't subscribed already, make sure you do that. Hit that like button if you guys enjoy the tutorial. And check us out next week. Thanks for watching.